Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Gosh darn! Bring her back! Put my damn dog back down! Come on! Bring back Yeller! You go away, you big, ugly bird! Well, I guess I've really lost it tonight, right? But hey, we got a crazy show this evening.
It is crazy.
We're going to be talking about the Mothman, that famous winged creature that was seen for several years down in the town, around the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Of course, John Keel wrote about it in his famous book, Mothman Prophecies, that was later made into a movie starring Richard Gere.
Richard Gere, yes.
And we were going to have on this evening Sharon Shull, who is the niece of Mary Hyre, but unfortunately there was something that came up at the last minute and she isn't able to make it. But we're going to be talking about Mothman, and we're going to be talking about the dreaded Men in Black. So the title of this show is Fearing the Men in Black and Flying with the Mothman. And our guests tonight, our old buddy Nick Redford, down there in the Dallas, Texas area. And I understand that, Nick, you've been fighting off tornadoes all day.
Yeah, it's been one of those exciting days in a strange way. There was a tornado alert, and there's a few roofs got pulled off in downtown Fort Worth, and then it started to head north, luckily, and then started to just sort of evaporate out, and I think pretty much it's gone now. But sort of 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock when I emailed you just to let you know in case there were any electrical issues. I mean, it was a major storm brewing then.
Well, just a normal day in Texas.
Yeah, the weather has certainly been acting peculiar lately. In fact, you notice, fellas, that the weather is now usually at the top of the news. You know, the 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock news or whatever you have out there. It's usually the main lead story with some flood or some catastrophe or tornado or hurricane or snow. I know in parts of the country now they've already got a few inches of snow on the ground. So I'm sure we have a lot to look forward to this winter as far as the weather goes. But this is not the 6 o'clock news. This is Exploring the Bizarre. And between Nick Redford and I, we have written 5 books on the Men in Black. And Nick has a new one that just came out a couple of weeks ago. Is that right, Nick? It's about 2 weeks old now?
Yeah, but 3 to 4, probably closer to a month, which is called Men in Black. Just called
Men in Black, personal stories and eerie adventures. Mm-hmm. And of course, Nick is a cryptozoologist. He is a UFO researcher. And anytime you turn on the TV, you're more than likely to see him. In fact, Nick and I were just a week or so ago back to back on the Travel Channel, and he told me he was going to be on, and I turned it on, and I was on. So that was an episode. That was an episode on Joshua Tree. And usually, Nick, on most of these shows, they throw you a couple of minutes as you're lucky if you get a couple of minutes because they got like many experts on. But on this one, we were actually on for quite a bit of time, which is
it was pretty good. You can never really gauge it with TV shows, but it was good.
Of course, it was recorded quite a while ago, but that's the way TV is. Anyway, Nick Redford is on with us, and we also have the MIB lady, Claudia Cunningham, who resides up around Albany, New York. And recently Claudia and I spent the afternoon together in the cemetery, standing at the foot of Charles Fort's tombstone. In fact, his whole family is buried. There are 9 members of the family, I think, up at the rural Albany cemetery just outside of Albany. And there's an interview that I did, Claudia, a video interview that you can find on Mr. UFO's Secret Files on YouTube. Now, Claudia's had experiences herself with the Men in Black, and she knows the strange events that have been going on in the cemetery and in around Albany as well. So we're looking forward to hearing from her this evening. And then we have a gentleman that I just recently met on YouTube, on Facebook, Steve Ward, who was involved with the this year's Mothman Festival. They have an annual event that Steve has been going on for about 10 years now.
I think 2001. I think was the first one. My first was 2006.
And we might as well just start off with you here while we have you. Well, I forgot Tim Schwartz. Tim, are you there?
Oh yes, I'm always here, lurking in the back.
My goodness, I'm so anxious to hear the from our guest this evening. It's not that I forgot about you, because your photo's right here in front of me on my desk. And anyway, so how's it been going down where you are in Indiana? Any tornadoes there in your neighborhood?
No tornadoes yet, but there is the possibility later on tonight. The weatherman says. So I guess
that right?
It's the same system that's in Texas right now. It's also all the way north up through southern Indiana.
Well, we've got a whirlwind coming through here for the next 2 hours on Exploring the Bizarre on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. So our discussion tonight is going to center around the Mothman and the Men in Black. Very related, actually, because around the time that the Mothman was being seen in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and in the Ohio area, there was encounters. People were reporting encounters with the Men in Black, and of course, John Keel went down to investigate the strange goings on in this small little town there, and came away. Well, he met the lady, Mary Hyre. Mary Hyre was a columnist for the Athens Messenger, which is a newspaper. I think it was across the Silver Bridge, of course, that collapsed later on. Spans Ohio and West Virginia, and I think Steve, do you know that Mary was on the Ohio side?
She had an office on the Point Pleasant side on 6th Street. Oh, okay. 6th Street emptied right into the Silver Bridge.
Now, why didn't you tell us, Steve, since you're the one that's closely connected with the Mothman and the festival, what is the history of Mothman, just briefly, and how did you get involved in the festival and the activities down there?
Well, of course, the first really classic sighting took place in November of 1966. That's when the Mallets and the Scarberries, there were 2 couples that were cruising the infamous TNT area. That's now you were probably down there in the TNT area back in the 60s?
Well, yeah, the Silver Bridge collapsed in 1966 or 67. 67.
December
so I
of
would have
70,
been, I would have been down there maybe a year later. Of course, it's a long, long time ago, and the dates kind of fade from my memory after a while. But I went down there with my associate Jim Mosley, and we met up with Gray Barker and talked to some of the witnesses at that time. But go ahead, Steve. Give us a little detail on what the people saw.
Yeah, this was the TNT area. They called it the TNT area because during World War II, that's where they made dynamite munitions for the war, and they used to store them in these. They would call them these concrete bunkers, and they nicknamed them the igloos. And it was the igloos. These structures were covered with foliage and so forth, so that if the enemy ever flew over, they wouldn't. It would just look like landscape. Well. Years later, it became abandoned, and it became quite a lover's lane. And these 2 married couples, they would go through and do what they called chasing parkers, where they would sneak up on lovers unaware and then shine their headlights into the car and so forth. So they're just having a good time on a Saturday night or whatever night it was, and
not much to do in Point Pleasant then, I guess.
No,
on a Saturday night.
They went by the old North Power Plant. Now that's this whole area became abandoned for years. Anyway, they saw some kind of a man-like creature with wings, red glowing eyes, and I guess it had one of its wings seemed to be caught in the fence. I was able to talk to Linda Scarberry one-on-one several times before she passed. And so they saw this thing, and it just really freaked them out, and they took off. And apparently it chased them into town down Route 62, and supposedly they were reaching speeds of about 100 miles per hour. That was the first big sighting. It chased them all the way into town. And then later on, there were other real classic sightings by some other people. I'm trying to remember the lady that there was the lady that was holding her baby, her infant child. They were visiting some friends that lived in the TNT area. There were actually houses out there at the time, and her brother, they had seen some kind of a strange light in the sky, and all of a sudden this thing rose up out of the ground and stood up, and she actually collapsed and dropped her baby. The baby was okay, but I never was able to talk to her one-on-one, but I saw some long-form interviews done with some of these people, and I've spoken to about 6 of the original witnesses altogether. So I'm very convinced that they saw something really bizarre. But once this hit, it was. I first heard about it. I lived up in Michigan. And that November of '66, this came over the wires, and it was fascinating to me. I mean, I had already been interested in UFOs because the previous March is where we had the famous swamp gas sightings right in my backyard, Ann Arbor, Hillsdale, Dexter. All these UFOs were being sighted. So that year kind of culminated with this incredible report of this man bird chasing these 2 couples down Route 62.
Now, wasn't there also an incident? We started out with this little skit there about the fellow having his dog snatched up by the Mothman. Wasn't there an actual incident like that where somebody supposedly, yes. or is that just a legend?
No, that was Merle Partridge. There was something out in his yard, and it was a little bit confusing. I think there were some editorial things done in the Mothman Prophecies. John Keel told my good friends John and Tim Frick once. John Keel, by the way, was at the 2003 Mothman Festival, and that's where they unveiled this incredible Mothman statue that sits in the center of town. But he told my friends that they had done, actually half of the Mothman Prophecies was cut out. He was able to salvage later into another book.
Yeah, that's right. I think that became the 8th Tower.
Exactly.
If I remember correctly. Well, we had John and I sat here a couple of days, and we took a lot of his old articles and some of his paperback books, and we pasted them up in an 8.5 by 11 tome, which we called Strange Mutants, which had a lot of the material from the Mothman. I knew John fairly well. He lived only a couple of blocks from me, and in fact, he did introduce me to Mary Heyer, and we had a discussion about some of her Men in Black, encounters, which we'll get into in just a little while. But okay, how did you get involved in this? I mean, what is your actual involvement in the festival itself?
I just want to let you know, Merle Partridge, I did actually see him. He spoke at the festival in 2006, and he recounted where the dog had disappeared. I mean, he saw some strange lights out in the field, and then Bandit was gone. Never saw the dog again. He and his daughter were there speaking, and they even saw some giant UFOs cross over their property. But I had read Keel's book. Now, I had followed Keel, his writings for quite a while, and then when I read the Mothman Prophecies, I thought I have to go see this, what Point Pleasant looks like. So I took a trip. My first trip to Point Pleasant was in actually 1977, and I came down. That's when the old North Power Plant was still standing, and you could actually drive through the TNT area. You can't do that now. You can go in and walk in certain areas. But then one fateful day, I was looking at reading Fate magazine, and Fate magazine was good for telling you what kind of upcoming events were going to happen, various paranormal conventions and so forth. And I saw the Mothman Festival. I thought, well, we've got to go see that. So 2006, my wife and I came down and just fell in love with the town, and it's the festival is so much fun. It's free. You have speakers that go on all day, and of course, people have their tables set up to sell their wares and so forth. There are a lot of A-list speakers there, like Dick Redfern was there a year ago. Rosemary Ellen Guiley is there every year.
Yeah. We just had her on the program, I think 2 weeks ago now.
Talking about the gin, I imagine.
The gin, yes.
Yes.
And not the type you drink. So
that's true. But and they also have more regional and local guests. They've done a really good job. Jeff Wamsley and Carolyn Harris are the co-founders of the festival. And Jeff Wamsley runs the Mothman Museum, and they've done a phenomenal job. It's just professionally done, and they've done a great. Even if you don't believe anything about the Mothman, it's certainly John Keel said that this is folklore in the making, and certainly within the last few decades, the folklore of the Mothman is going to outlast all of us, and they've done a great job of documenting all this stuff in the museum.
Well, I remember when John came back from Point Pleasant. I think he had gone down to West Virginia. He was doing a column, a syndicated column for a newspaper syndicate that was in, I don't know, 30 or 40. His column was in like 30 or 40 papers around the country. And he had gone down to investigate the story of, I believe it was a cat with wings or something like that, kind of like
yes.
a Ripley's. Yeah, a Ripley's, believe it or not, type of, animal there. And anyway, he came back and he told us about how he had sat on the top of not a mountain but a hill, and had watched these objects for several nights in a row, come in fairly close to where he was seated, and there was all this activity about the Mothman and all. Of course, it wasn't getting any press at that time, especially up where we were. So, we were kind of hesitant. Keel had some pretty wild stories to tell. This was back in the 60s when nuts and bolts were, still the main focus as far as UFOs went. And Keel was telling us some very, very strange, tales of the bizarre. In fact, we used to go together every other Friday night, I think it was, to Jim Mosley's Saucer News meetings along Times Square. He would rent, in those days, you could rent a little hotel, like banquet room that held maybe 200 people for about $25 a night, or maybe $35. Can you imagine that today?
No.
You couldn't have a meeting if you wanted to. They want $2,000 for the same room, or some nonsense, like that. So we would all get together and go out to I think it was the Biltmore cafeteria. And, we'd stay out till like midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, because we didn't have the internet in those days, and so forth, and just, thrash this stuff back and forth. And John had these quite amazing stories. And I remember being up at his apartment many, many times till about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, listening to him tell these weird tales of the Mothman, and the telephone calls that would come into his hotel room, and it was all just unusual. And I was kind of skeptical, and Jim Mosley, of course, was always skeptical about everything, pretty much. But the more that I listened to John, and the more that I got out and started investigating this on my own, I realized that there was a whole different world of UFOs out there than we had been led to believe, and that we were dealing with something a bit stranger than just aircraft from some other planet. I mean, it just didn't seem to fit the mold. Now,
Yeah, you know,
when we come, yeah,
his book UFOs Operation Trojan Horse, that's the
yes.
one that really kind of turned the corner for me. It was before the Mothman prophecies, and that's where he tied in all this phenomena that seemed to be different. It seemed to tie it together and seemed to have links.
Well, we had I was on the board of director of John's New York Fortean Society, and we had our meetings actually right next door from where I am seated at the moment, but the building was torn down and it's now a vacant lot and will probably be a bank very soon, because that's all we have in New York City at the moment are nail parlors and banks. And so the vacant, I'm looking forward to the drilling and the hammering, which will no doubt go on for 2 years. But what can you do? I guess they call it progress.
Considering the age of your building, all of that jackhammering and building next door is guaranteed to bring it down, I think.
Well, actually, when they did bring the building down, which is the vacant lot now, they actually stopped the elevator for about 2 weeks because they considered it, it could be dangerous that somebody might be in there. But somebody did come in a couple of days ago or a week ago and took photographs of everything in the apartment in case there's any kind of structural, damage. And of course, there's a lot of structural damage in this old apartment, but not in the rest of the building. But that's another story. I guess now we're going to be coming up on a commercial break in just a minute, and then we're going to bring in our other guests. We've got a lot to really discuss here this evening. The Men in Black has always fascinated me. In fact, you've probably seen me on the History Channel. I'm probably the only person who's ever actually photographed what is believed to be an authentic Men in Black, a MIB, and so I've kind of had a close dealing with the subject, and I'm probably one of the few people who ever met Albert K. Bender, and of course it was Albert K. Bender who first reported the Men in Black and their nefarious deeds, and so when we come back, we're going to be discussing the Men in Black and the Mothman, and we've got another 90 minutes of fascinating discussion with three of the best guests you could possibly have, and this is Exploring the Bizarre.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And I do encourage our listeners to give us a call, text us, however you want to communicate with your questions. We love hearing from you. We love getting your questions too. It's it keeps the program alive and fresh. I think that's a good way to put it. To get your input. But tonight we're talking about Mothman and the Men in Black, and one of the things that I think is really interesting, especially with the whole Mothman situation, especially in 1967, is that people in Point Pleasant and the surrounding areas were also seeing, strange people running around. I mean, you'd call them Men in Black, but I mean, they kind of came in all different shapes and sizes. Now, these were people that, I mean, they had no idea of the whole Men in Black mythos. But at the same time, in New York, Long Island, around Mount Misery, there is also a lot of Men in Black activities going on. And so, Nick, I'll send this question your direction. Now, your third book on the Men in Black has just come out. And what got you going? What got you involved in the whole Men in Black thing to begin with?
Well, when I was sort of probably like a lot of us, we get into these subjects when we're young. And for me, I was about 11 or 12. And I think the first few books I read were, like, for example, The the Mothman Prophecies, and I think it's one of Brad Steiger's early books, Mysteries of Time and Space, and a couple by Charles Berlitz, things like that. And I remember reading the Mothman Prophecies, you know, and it sort of opened my eyes to, well, to Mothman, and like you said, the surrounding weird stuff. Then actually the next book that I read when I forget what I was, probably 14 or 15, I read Gray Barker's They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, which told the story of Albert Bender, or at least Barker's version of events in terms of what Bender claimed to have experienced. Then, of course, later on, I read Bender's own book, Flying Saucers and the Three Men. So, in other words, my exposure pretty much was through the books. But I was fascinated by it because the Men in Black was clearly tied to the UFO phenomenon. But if you read the original reports, you know, they were nothing like Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, you know, like in the movies.
Right.
They had these clear and deep paranormal overtones to them as well, where, you know, they were just sort of very unsettling and sinister. Almost, you know, you could say they were occult based in many respects. And so it sort of fascinated me, and, you know, anything new would come out, I would read about it, and started doing a few articles back in the 90s for English magazines, and people contacted me with their stories, and it kind of built up from there, really. And I mean, it's one of these subjects where, I guess, like you write about any subject, somebody who writes about ghosts gets a lot of feedback from readers on the subject of ghosts. You know, I've written 3 books on the Men in Black, so I get a lot of input and stories from people who've seen the Men in Black. And to be honest, because it's one of my favourite subjects, I mean, I'd be happy to sort of do a Men in Black book every 18 months or so, you know, to update people so they could see all the new data, because there's so many strands and angles and theories as to who the Men in Black are, that it makes for a fascinating story. It's not sort of, no pun intended, it's not black and white, you know, it's it goes in a lot of different directions, and that's what I find fascinating about it all.
Well, now you mentioned Albert Bender, and what a lot of people don't realize is that Bender, besides being interested in UFOs, he was also very much into the occult and paranormal. And I think, I mean, you know, a lot of people, including yourself, have made the observation that there could be some kind of occult connection with the whole Men in Black thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, Bender was heavily into some really deep and dark occult stuff. You know, he lived in the attic of this old house in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and he actually created what he called his supernatural altar in the attic room that he lived in. And he wasn't just a dabbler, you know, he was heavily conversant with occult rites and rituals and that kind of thing. And, you know, I mean, I've investigated enough things to make me believe there's a genuine paranormal world, and it's not one to sort of mess with, you know, in haphazard fashion or lightly even. You know, there's such things like psychic backlash, and you open a door, you don't know what you're going to let through. And there's a lot of evidence from Bender's stories that, you know, he essentially opened a door to something that manifested in the form of these shadowy figures that became known as the Men in Black. And you can tell from his story that, I mean, how it plagued his life and affected both his mental health and physical health. And some of the stories, for example, how he would feel dizzy and lightheaded in his bedroom, and suddenly there would be this overwhelming smell of like brimstone, you know, which is like a classic paranormal aspect. And, you know, there are so many parallels where if you read Bender's book, I mean, it comes across far less Mulder and Scully and far more like H.P. Lovecraft meets Mulder and Scully. You know, very, very weird story. And you find that in a lot of the Men in Black stories, though, that they have countless sort of supernatural aspects to them.
Well, Nick,
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Nick. Now, I met Albert K. Bender actually once. He wrote a book called Flying Saucers and the Three Men, which was more like a science fiction book than. I mean, he claimed it was real, but it was just total I don't know, a fantasy as far as I'm concerned. I guess he claims that he was taken to the North or the South Pole and met some people from some other planet. I don't even remember the details of it, and the book was pretty much ignored by everyone in the field. But certainly Albert K. Bender was not the first individual to the Men in Black. I think even in the Maury Island incident, there was a MIB that was encountered. But what have you found out historically about them?
Well, yeah, that's interesting because there are a number of cases that predate, the UFO phenomenon beginning in 1947. A friend of mine in England, Nigel Wright, who's a well-known researcher in the UK, Nigel spent some time going through old newspaper reports in search of when there was a wave of sort of phantom airships, as they became known over here. There was a similar phenomenon round about 1908, 1909, 1910 in the UK. Nigel found a story where three ship workers were taking a lunch break, near one particular port area in the north of England, and an early car turned up, black car, and three guys got out of the car and came over to these workmen and said, "Have you seen any strange craft in the sky, any strange balloons in the sky?" And they, these guys were just sort of staring and all dressed alike. And they said, "No, we haven't seen anything." They just turned around and got back in this black car and drove off. That sounds like the typical weird activity of the Men in Black today, but that was like 1910. I found other stories where, going back hundreds of years, where people who were researching and investigating the field of alchemy, alchemists turning base metals into precious metals, a number of alchemists who'd been visited by sort of black cloaked figures in the night, in the middle of the night, sometimes warning them to keep away from alchemy, other times sort of imparting the secrets of alchemy. But they sound like the Men in Black. And another book I'm working on right now on women in black cases, which are very kind of similar but less well known. I've got stories of women in black type characters threatening people in relation to UFOs and paranormal activity going back hundreds of years. So I think it's an old phenomenon that has very much been overlooked. People haven't necessarily tied these ancient stories or centuries-old stories with today's Men in Black, but there are clear parallels and comparisons when you look into it.
Well, now we actually have somebody on our panel tonight who has had their own actual Men in Black experience, and so Claudia, we're glad to have you with us tonight. Why don't you tell us, about your experience?
Oh, well, I've been interested in this crazy stuff since I was about 5. I remember I was laying in bed, and my mother had a curtain over my closet. And, of course, I always imagined that some monster was, going to come out and grab me. I always loved to be afraid. I don't know, it's probably something wrong with me, but it kind of led me into a life of investigating different weird phenomena. And the more I spoke to friends, the more stories I kind of accumulated through the years. But the big thing with the Men in Black, I have to set the stage for you because you have to, in your mind, picture this cemetery, which is probably about 3 miles outside of the city of Albany, New York, which is about 148 miles north of New York City. It's the capital of New York, and mostly a government town. Most of the people that live here work for the government. And compared to New York, it's an extremely dull place to live, but it's very pretty. And outside of paranormal goings on, there's not much going on here. But anyway, in I want to say 1999, but I think it was 2010, that I got a phone call from a very good friend of mine where this thing happened. Now, the Albany Rural Cemetery is where this disappearing black car happened to a friend of mine. And like I said, it's about 4 miles outside of the capital area. And it's in a very imposing cemetery. It's located on a very long hill. And to give you a little background, it was in 1844, it was opened. as a result of where the people used to be buried in the city of Albany in what is now Washington Park. And there were heavy rains one year, and some of the caskets actually came to the surface, so it was pretty appalling. So they decided to bury the bodies outside of the Albany proper and lay them to rest on this hill. And the cemetery itself is very beautiful, actually, because there are certain parts of it where there's a very beautiful pond. There are people jogging. You see people having picnics or walking their dogs. But there's also several parts of that place that look like something out of a horror movie, quite literally. And it's very dark. There's a lot of side roads in there that are kind of gravelly. And so if you pull in there, you can always hear if someone is coming in back of you or ahead of you. My friend Linda was a neighbor of mine who moved to Menands, New York, which is where the cemetery is located. And she was kind of like me, kind of interested in the beyond and what happened. And her mother had recently passed away, so she was running to card readers and psychics to try to scare up the ghost of her mother or something. And she got kind of really into this stuff, maybe a little bit too much so. So one afternoon, I just came home from work, and my phone rang, and it was my old friend Linda, and she's a nurse at the Veterans Memorial Hospital in Albany. And outside of her interest in the paranormal, she's fairly well-grounded. She's very intelligent. She's probably, I think Linda's about 60 now. So the phone rang, and she said, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" And she said, "Well, something really upsetting happened to me." But she said, "I was more angry than scared." And she said, "You're the only person I know who won't laugh at me." And I said, "Well, gee, tell me." So she said, I wanted to go on this historical tour of the cemetery. She says, "I just had this yen to go over there after work." And it was a beautiful day. It was in May, and at the time of year, around that time of year, there's something called milkweed in our area. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it kind of covers your car. It blows through the air. It's kind of annoying. You have to kind of put your windshield wipers on sometimes to get it off the windshield of your car. And she said the first thing I noticed when I pulled in there, that she said I could hardly see. So she says I decided to go up this one side hill and just park the car and walk around because I couldn't see very well. And as you pull into this place, there's a huge Gothic place right on the big building built in the 1800s on the left-hand side, right through the big iron gates. And that is the office, and that holds literally records to everyone who was ever buried there. And this includes President Chester Arthur, who was the 21st President of the United States, kind of little known now. I think he's all but forgotten, but he's there. And Daniel Manning, who was served under President Cleveland as the Secretary of the Treasury, and it literally contains most of the aristocracy of the early settlements in Albany, and they were mostly Dutch. But the crypts are absolutely beautiful, ornate. They look like little houses. They're extremely they're beautiful, actually, the way they're made. Some made out of marble. So Linda got the yen to go up there and just take a little walk for herself and kind of, go on this, as she described it, his historical tour. And it was a beautiful day. So she pulled up the side road. In fact, I've been there many times. It's in back of the Gothic house on top of a hill. And she said, I pulled over to the side, and she said, I turned the ignition off, went to take my keys out. And she said, in the space of a second, she says there was no one in that place, and she would have heard it if a car had been coming. Within 2 seconds, she says, I looked up, and in my rear mirror, here was this huge, and she described it as a Hummer. She said it was a huge, like a military-type Hummer, all black, black tinted windows, big, huge black tires. no milkweed on the thing at all. And she said, and I still remember the exact quote, she said it looks like they had just driven it out of a showroom. It was completely a new vehicle. And it came so close to her. And again, this always rings in my head. She said they could have been in my back seat. They were just too close. They came right up out of nowhere. So Linda is a red-blooded, good old Italian girl, and she has got one temper, and I can attest to that. And she said instead of getting scared, she said, I was really mad. She said, at first I thought they were going to rob me or worse, but she says I wasn't thinking anything paranormal. She said I was kind of sitting there waiting for the next move to see if they would get out of the car or what. And she said, to my amazement, they kind of backed up away from her and made a U-turn. And as I said, there were many side roads in the cemetery. They're everywhere. And she said, I watched it go down one of these side roads until the top of it disappeared. And she says, I was going to run after it and just see who they were. And she said, imagine when she says, I was right after this thing, and when I got over to this so-called road, there was nothing there but a chain-link fence with a bunch of graves on the other side. So she said this thing actually vanished into thin air. It was there one moment and just there was nowhere to go unless it just disappeared. So she turned around and went down this hill, right by the office where she had come in. And in the middle of this black, very wide macadam road where you first enter was this black vehicle. And it was right in the middle of the road. And she said, I had the feeling they were waiting for me. And she said outside of the thing was a very tall, skinny man, all in black. Looked like everything was brand new. His black shirt, black tie, she called it a pork pie hat. Like I guess the gangsters used to wear in the old B movies in the 30s and 40s, and black shiny shoes. She says I actually even noted his shoes, and he was like turned toward the car like he was talking to somebody, and actually looked like he was speaking to somebody. But she said the window was rolled up, and she said he turned around very slowly, and he had black wraparound sunglasses. And she said he just kind of looked down, like over the top of the glasses at her. And she says, I just punched it. She says, I just got out of there. And she says, when I looked around, they were gone. They completely blinked out. The man, the car, everything. So, of course, I had just got finished the year before reading a book by Tim Beckley, The Silencers, which was the first time I ever heard of the Men in Black. And it was a really great read, and, I was aware of what these things were, but I wasn't concentrating on them or thinking of the book or anything. So when she told me, I said, Linda, that sounds like something that this Timothy Green Beckley writes about and talks about. And I said, they call them Men in Black, and they're usually seen around the time of UFO sightings. And I said, did you see anything like that? And she said, no. She said, but I swear on my mother's grave that this happened. And she is not a frivolous person. She's very sincere, and you can take it to the bank if she says that happened. So anyway, of course, I got on the computer and I immediately Googled Albany Rural Cemetery, and I was amazed to find that not only are there the sinister-looking men in black, disappearing black vehicles, but around the pond in the cemetery, there is actually seen at certain nights of the year a funeral procession, and the people are dressed in the garb of maybe the 1800s, and the ladies have the long black mourning clothes with the black veils, and there's a casket in the back of a horse-drawn carriage. And I'm going by reports that I can only tell you I read this on the internet, but people have seen this. And
now do you think that this is a physical thing that's going on, or is it a psychic, a ghostly manifestation?
I have come to the conclusion in my own life that it's of a demonic realm, and this is my feeling. I could be wrong, but I believe there's something evil spirits in there, and they're probably in every cemetery. I think they're any place where there is darkness or unhappiness. I think the energy draws these creatures. But another thing, my niece, who you have met a few times.
Oh, yes. Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Lisa, big fan of yours.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh well.
she loves you.
Somebody has to be.
Oh no, she thinks you're just the greatest. She's
Oh, thank
very
you.
loves you, and
You
she
you
used
humble
to.
me immensely.
Well, it's true. And she used to, when she was going to college, she used to ride a bus with a young boy who would often sit next to her. And he was the caretaker, one of them at the cemetery. And she got talking about it because they would go past the cemetery. And he said, well, I work there. And he said, I open it up in the morning just before the dawn. And he said, I'm the last one out at night, just at dusk. And he said, many, many, many mornings when I'm there, I'll see this older lady, all in black, and she looks like something out of the last century or, late 1800s. And she just nods to him, and she says, why, good morning. And he says, I just say, good morning, ma'am. And, she just vanishes right in front of me. He said, I'm not afraid of her anymore. She's a good ghost or whatever she is. So that's another thing. And also reported is a couple who hold hands and float over the headstones in their pajamas at dusk, which is kind of interesting.
At least they're dressed.
They're dressed, right? Which is more
That's
than
all
yes.
I know. Yeah.
That's right.
I like that story. That to me is
Yes.
of all the things
That's
that are
kind of
going on.
romantic.
But
Yeah.
remember, we should remind the listeners that who is buried there, but Charles Fort. So
Yes.
we've got the king of the unusual and the bizarre, right there in spirit, no doubt, drawing upon all this energy or watching over what goes on in the cemetery. Sometime maybe we ought to have a seance, Claudia, and
I
see
think
if
that
we
would
can,
be great.
if we can bring in the spirit of the great Charles Fort, because I think all of us here on the panel today, if it wasn't for Lowe in the Book of the Damned, we probably wouldn't be discussing these topics.
Well, he was the father of it in this country anyway, that's for sure.
Well, Tim, we're going to have to take our break right now. I hear the music welling up in the distance.
It's the music of the spears, no doubt.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll continue our conversation about the Men in Black and Mothman.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All this lightning has burnt my fingertips off. I swear. This is the 10th week of Exploring the Bizarre, and I've just I got to stop wearing those antennae around, because they really just attract the lightning bolts, and it's 2 or 3 times a show. But what the heck, I've always, like I say, my interest in the Men in Black goes back to I think, believe it or not, when I was in the 4th grade. I had to do a book review. And so I was interested in UFOs. I had a UFO sighting at the age 10. And I picked They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers by Gray Barker. And it was a fascinating read. It still is. If you're gonna get into the Men in Black, I mean, that's one book that you've got to add to your library. Anyway, so I read the book, and I wrote a book review on it. It was probably only one. I think I actually came across it recently. It was like a page and a half, written in red pen on lined paper. But heck, I got a B+ on it. And believe you me, I don't think I got too many B+ in school. But the irony of the whole situation, and of course I've always been into synchronicities because they seem to follow me around, is that the author of the book, Gray Barker, who I did not know, of course, at the time, ended up being a close friend of mine. He published my first 3 books on UFOs, and when he passed away, I bought the last 50 copies of They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers in hardcover. So, well, that's a book obviously that had a pretty strong impact on my belief system as far as the UFOs and the paranormal goes. And like I said before, I had my own. This has been on television, and I've talked about this a few times. But I had my own MIB experience back in the 1960s, I think 66, 67. There was a wave of sightings up and down the East Coast, but particularly in New York and in New Jersey. Now, I was on the staff of Saucer News, which was Jim Mosley's magazine, and one of the assistant editors was a fellow by the name of John J. Robinson. And we had our office in New York, but Jack and his wife, Mary, lived over in Jersey City. Now, you take the PATH train over, and it takes like 10 or 15 minutes. And Jack worked in the city. He worked at one of the banks, I believe. Well, anyway, while Jack went to work in the morning, and Mary would go out and do the shopping and other errands, she reported seeing a strange individual standing in the doorway right next to in the building right next to where they lived, dressed in black with a hat and the whole bit, just like we've described, seemingly looking at everybody coming in and out of the building. Now, Jack had been involved in an investigation of UFO case which involved 4 teenage boys who had seen a object land in a nearby park, and some humanoid creatures get out of the ship, and I think they scurried around and dug up some soil samples and went back into the craft. And while they were being interviewed, there was a black Cadillac that was parked across down the block, or maybe a block and a half away, seemingly somebody looking through the tinted windows, that were rolled partly down at the boys being interviewed about their UFO and humanoid encounter. Anyway, Jack, at around this time that this individual was standing in the doorway, reported that his telephone, apparently somebody was eavesdropping on the conversation. There were strange clicks and whines and whistles on the phone, like people have reported over the years. And one time he came back, from his job in the afternoon, and somebody had been in the apartment, had taken some of the folders about this particular case and spread them all over the floor. Anyway, there was a whole series of events that was going on. And Mary, his wife, claimed that she saw this individual standing in the doorway while she would do her shopping in the morning. So Jim Mosley and I, well, we didn't know whether to believe him or not. We thought, it's an interesting story, but maybe they're just trying to get our attention. So what we decided to do was take a trip over to Jersey City one morning without telling Jack or Mary that we were coming. Sort of a surprise attack, if it were. Kind of your UFO SWAT team, I suppose. And we drove over in Jim's car, and I was in the passenger seat. And we came to the block where Jack and Mary lived, and very, very tight. Traffic parked on both sides of the street, and a very, very narrow road to drive on by. Everybody double parked, illegally, and it's a neighborhood setting, residential apartment buildings, and a barber shop, I think, on the block there, maybe a little grocery store or something. Anyway, as we pulled up to the building, we noticed that indeed there was somebody standing in the doorway, and there was a black Cadillac, black car of some sort, parked at the curb. So Jim gave me his camera, and I took a photograph of the individual in the doorway, which is available. You can see it on the internet. You can Google it, just Men in Black Tim Beckley, and a photograph of the car. And Jim suggested that I get out and confront this individual and find out what he was doing there. Well, we decided we would pull around the block and then come back and double park or try to find a park space or something, and I would get out and confront this individual. Well, it probably took us, because of the traffic flow, about 10 minutes to get around the block. When we got there, the individual was gone, and so was the car. But I did take a photograph of him. It's been, like I say, it's been published. And the strange thing about this, instead of the MIB frightening us, it seems like we frightened him, because Jack and Mary never reported seeing this individual again, and apparently the telephone calls, mysterious telephone calls, and the beepings and stuff stopped after that. So I would say that I have the power to stop the Men in Black in their tracks. But yeah.
Tim, I have a question real quick.
Yes.
I remember seeing a picture of the Robinsons in I think it
Yes.
was Sauceranian magazine,
Yes.
and they were in their living room, and I think were they playing with like a Ouija board or
Oh
had a
yeah. Well, now Mary. Yeah. Now Jack was a. I wouldn't say he was a nuts and bolts man. He was on the Long John Nebel show a couple of times with Jim Moseley. He was a fan of the Shaver Mystery and the Inner Earth, but and kind of a member of the Inner Circle. He knew Augie Roberts and Dominic Lucchesi and Gray Barker and Albert K. Bender, and he wrote about a lot of these, strange things. In fact, in my book, The UFO Silencers, I have the whole story that Jack wrote. It probably comes out to 10 or 12 pages. But his wife, Mary, was more into the psychic stuff than he was, and she did dabble in the Ouija board. So again, we could say perhaps she conjured this individual up. I don't know, but yeah, she was definitely into the occult, and Jack was to some degree, but more into the UFOs in the Inner Earth, which of course with the Darrow and the Shaver mystery, it can be somewhat menacing and dark, and perhaps they did draw something, some negativity to them. Although this guy, the MIB that was standing in the doorway, he never, as far as I know, actually threatened anyone. He was more like, if you look at the photograph, to me, he looks like a stone statue. I mean, just very, very rigid and very, straight standing. And the most peculiar thing about him, I think, is his shoes. It looks like something Puck the fairy would wear, or something. I don't know, just very peculiar. And of course, now Jim thought it was a mortician or a member of the local mob or something like that, but I see no reason to indicate that was the case. But hey, Nick, why don't you tell us, pick one or two cases out of your recent book, Men in Black: Personal Stories and Eerie Adventures, and tease us with them. I mean, what do you think are some of the best tales that you present in that book?
Well, certainly one of the creepiest was given to me by a guy named Peter Beckman. And Peter is a well-known voiceover artist in the entertainment industry. Does a lot of work for like Sci-Fi Channel and things like that. And back in the late 19th, he told me a story a couple of years ago, which is in the book, how back in the late 1960s, around about 1969, he and a friend were hanging out at his house one evening. Parents were out. They're only sort of 18 and 19 at the time. And this was just after Rosemary's Baby, the Roman Polanski movie, came out. And they actually had a friend in the audio-visual industry, and they got a copy of the soundtrack of the movie. And they were just hanging out, listening to the soundtrack, and taking a few psychedelics as well. And
psychedelics, really?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And Peter told me how, as they got to one particular track on the soundtrack, which was essentially tied in the movie with the Black Mass section, he said that a very strange atmosphere came over the entire house. It was almost like a chill wind blew in, so to speak. And there was suddenly this knock at the door. And when they opened the door, there were these two ominous-looking characters that they kind of looked almost like they were dead. They looked pale, sickly, wearing these badly fitting black suits, and essentially just walked into the house. And it was a very strange situation where Peter was unable to remember the entire situation. But he felt, with hindsight, that the psychedelics, if you like, had opened a portal or a doorway, kind of like the equivalent with a shaman in the South American jungle, ingesting a psychedelic and communing with supernatural entities. He felt that it was something like that it wasn't a case of them hallucinating, because it would have been like a combined hallucination. He felt that they, in conjunction with the music and the setting and the psychedelics, it opened a portal that allowed these characters to come through. And as it turned out, they were classic Men in Black. And there was even a black car outside. But like in so many of these cases, the car just vanished into nothingness. And the Men in Black vanished into nothing. They were just gone. And that was a very creepy story. And Peter told me how he'd never forgotten this, primarily because of the occult overtones, the tie-in with the movie, which in itself was about, devil worship, etc. And that was certainly, one of the most unsettling stories in the book. One of the ones that fascinated me was a paper that David Weatherly wrote. David wrote a couple of years ago the book The Black-Eyed Children, and David wrote a paper for the book drawing parallels between the Men in Black and the Black-Eyed Children. For example, they both dress in black, they both have pale skin. The Men in Black wear black hats. The Black-Eyed Children wear hoodies, and both groups try and find ways to get into people's homes. And that was just sort of the tip of the iceberg. And David presented sort of fascinating parallels between these Black-Eyed Children that have been surfacing more and more in the last few years and the original Men in Black, clearly demonstrating that in some fashion they're both part of a bigger mystery, if you like.
So, Nick, what do you conclude about all this? I mean, do you have your own theories or opinions as to what the MIBs might be? Well, I do. I think, the genuinely weird Men in Black are paranormal, but of course that then begs the question, well, how do we define the realm of the paranormal? That's the big issue. I think we're dealing with things that are sort of multidimensional, that sometimes manifest in our reality and then they're gone again. I think they have the ability to kind of affect the human mind, so where many of these encounters occur when the person is in somewhat of an altered state, and that's why they open the front door and let these people in, something you would never normally do. But they do it, and I think it's because their common sense factors have almost been taken over, hijacked or mind controlled. So that my opinion is that, although I think some Men in Black could be government people who have taken on the guise of the Men in Black because that imagery is intimidating, but the real ones, as I said, I think are supernatural. A couple of examples, there have been Men in Black sightings involving Bigfoot witnesses and Loch Ness Monster witnesses. They've been visited by the Men in Black. I've got some cases where people have been using Ouija boards and they were visited, but there was no UFO component to it at all. So I think, for the most part, we can rule out government agents, apart from the cases where, as I said, when they adopt that guise for intimidation purposes. But the real ones, they're nothing to do with the Pentagon or the FBI. I remember John Keel had a memo from the I think it was the Pentagon or the Air Force regarding the Men in Black, stating that they were not responsible for these cases and were trying to find out who was using their counterfeit credentials, stating that they were from the government. Apparently there were agents going around claiming that they were government, from the government, from various FBI or whatever.
Well,
and apparently
they were actually dressed in military uniforms, Air Force especially.
Well, the interesting thing is, the Men in Black, the term, is like a catch-all. I've got some cases where they turned up in brown suits. Sometimes they were women, claiming to be census takers and things like this. So, and today you can look at things like the Shadow People and the Hat Man, as they're known. They all seem like subcategories, or they're all somehow interlinked, all these phenomena.
Well, I know there were Men in Black, of course, that were being seen on a pretty much regular basis down in around the Point Pleasant area when the Mothman sightings were taking place. In fact, I think that John Keel said that some of them were disguised as census takers, and others were coming around offering to take photographs of those in the household or something, and it was a whole very weird incident that was taking place, and it tied in with the collapse, of course, of the Silver Bridge. Now, Steve, we were going to have on this evening Sharon, who is the niece of Mary Hyre. Now, Mary worked as the one of the columnists for the Athens Gazette, and she was deeply involved in this. And in fact, I know she had a couple of experiences involving the Men in Black, and apparently she even had a dream sometime before the Silver Bridge collapsed, and she saw people in cars and all floating in the water and Christmas gifts and all. Did you ever talk to? Well, you must have talked to Sharon, correct?
No, actually, I haven't. I've seen her speak at the festival, but I've never had a chance to
Yes.
meet her
Oh,
one on
okay.
one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Mary had that a reoccurring dream of Christmas packages floating in the water. I don't know if she connected it to the. I think at that time both she and Keel they felt something was happening. You know, Keel was getting those strange messages through various contactees that really felt they were in communication with with some bizarre entities, and like the Indrid Cold character
Yes.
and Apple, APOL. They were very much like MIB characters, and they felt something really ominous was about to happen, but they could never quite pin it down. And I remember John Keel felt very blindsided when it was the bridge collapsed. He didn't really expect that.
Well, he was expecting there was going to be an explosion at
At a plant,
the chemical
I think.
factory. Yeah.
Right. But
Now, are
Well,
you?
I know
Go
that
ahead.
I know that Mary had a couple of incidences or episodes involving the Men in Black. One of them actually, I think, came into her office one time, and she described him as being a very small, black-haired man with hypnotic eyes, who was dressed in a thin sleeve shirt and shoes with very thick soles.
yes,
In
Jack
fact, I
Brown.
think, yeah, okay. Well, now, do you have any more detail? Do you remember any more
Well,
details on that?
just
And
that he
also, yeah,
he was just a real odd character. He was he stuttered. He did, like you said, he had these hypnotic eyes. He picked up a ballpoint pen off the table and
yes.
seemed to be fascinated by it, like he hadn't seen that before. That's a characteristic in a lot of the MIB reports where there's something odd. There was the gentleman that tried to drink Jello. There's the Jack Brown that was so fascinated by a ballpoint pen.
Well,
Uh,
I used to drink Jello shots. I think they were called. Yeah. So that's not that strange. Come on, yeah, yeah. Well now, Steve, were there other people in the Point Pleasant area while Mothman was being seen who had encounters with the MIBs?
yes, there's a lady, Susan Shepard, who lives up in Parkersburg, and she runs ghost tours up there. She talked about when she was a little girl, she was playing with a friend of hers, and they saw these strange men come to their door that fit the description of a typical MIB. There were no cars or anything around there, and they just kind of hid until they went away. Jeff Wamsley, who, again, he's one of the guys that, he runs the Mothman Museum and founded the Mothman Festival. A lady came into the Mothman Museum one time and told him a story that she had never told anybody about these strange men that came to the door. Of course, Linda Scarberry, their family had men in dark clothing come to their door. She was one of the original people that saw the Mothman. So a lot of people would see these strangers in town and you know what? Also, some of them showed up in I can't remember if it was Scarberry. It was a relative of hers, I think. Showed up as one of these sort of bedroom invader kind of things, where it showed up by the bed. So there really is some kind of a bizarre paranormal aspect. I know that Keel one time wrote that he thought that some of the MIB phenomena may even be illusory, but not that they were total illusions. There was something really going on, but they may not have been terribly solid or flesh and blood.
Well, I remember one time he described to me an incident where he saw a UFO. He was among a group of about maybe 5 or 6 people, and he saw a completely different object than the other
Right.
witnesses that were with him. And yeah, he did believe that they are phantasms. They are specters. There's no doubt about it. even Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who is pretty much thought of as a nuts and bolts, researcher, having been employed by the Air Force, Project Blue Book, and so forth. He told me one time about how he was getting reports of the Men in Black, and he was taking them seriously. One case I remember in particular involved a police officer who started receiving telephone calls that had a UFO sighting and so forth, and was being you usually think of police cars following people on the highway or something. Well, he was being followed. Now that's certainly a twist there, but he took the subject very seriously, and I guess would have done more research into it, and maybe he did, but of course he passed away. And
right. Are you familiar with Jenny Randalls, the well-known British researcher? Oh yeah, you published one of her books.
Oh yes, well I did indeed. Yes.
Well, she wrote a book on the Men in Black, and she described Are we going to a commercial?
We are.
Yes,
okay.
We are, and so we'll continue this conversation when we come back from our break. So you are listening to Exploring the Bizarre with Tim Beckley and, of course, Tim Swartz. We'll be right back.
The KCOR Digital Radio Network hotline number is open at 702-425-9230. 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. Tweet your comments anytime to KCOR Radio or simply use hashtag KCOR. Even better, jump in the live chat room and share your thoughts with the show at kcorradio.com. Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
So I may be talking prematurely here, but so far we've been talking about the Men in Black and Black-Eyed Children, and the show is held up. I mean, so far no bad connections, no hang-ups, no weird noises over the line. So I think we're
So what's
good.
wrong? What are we doing wrong?
Yeah, that's right. Hey, Steve Ward, you mentioned during our break that you're having an ongoing interview. Do you want to plug that real quick here?
Oh, sure.
What's on my mind?
Well, Brent Rains, he was on. I'm at the Mothman Festival. I run the TNT tours now. At least I'm one of the guys. There's 3 wagons to go through. And Brent was on my wagon, and so he asked me if I'd be interested in doing an interview. So we've been doing a very long-form interview in his Alternate Perceptions online magazine, and it's been kind of fun. It's sort of the saga of how a kid from Michigan, fascinated by flying saucers, ended up giving tours in the TNT area a half a century later. So it's been a lot of fun.
All right, great. Well, we've been kind of circling around the whole Mothman and Men in Black and things like that in the Point Pleasant area. So, Steve, why don't you talk a little bit about the what finally happened there at Point Pleasant with the whole Silver Bridge incident? I mean, and that basically, a lot of people probably have forgotten about that, or many of our younger listeners probably have never even heard about it.
Well, of course, it was about 13 months to the day of that first sighting that the bridge collapsed. It was December 15th at about 5 p.m. And it was, of course, just before Christmas. The bridge was an old bridge that was built, I think, around 1910 or 12. The people that witnessed it collapsed like a series of dominoes. If you remember the film, The Mothman, the John Keel character has all kinds of time to warn everybody to get off the bridge, but in the reality, it just happened in moments, and 46 people were lost as a result of that. A lot of people, there's people that believe that the Mothman was kind of a harbinger, like a banshee, warning people that something was going to happen. Others think there was no connection whatsoever, but about that time, there were still sightings of the Mothman occasionally. There were still UFOs, but it did seem like all the weirdness that was going on did at least subside to a large degree. But that was really that really hit the town hard, and it's taken them decades to recover from it. I think the people that started the festival were trying to turn something, a negative into a positive. It really has been good for the town. But there's still, there are people that lost loved ones there, and it's just something they're never going to forget.
Well, speaking of the festival, I mean, how I remember when it first started. I mean, how has it progressed since its beginning?
It's I guess it was had very humble beginnings, but there are thousands of people that filter through there. Like I say, there's 2 days at the theater, the local theater. They have all these speakers that are there. You can go see. People go off independently and like to explore the TNT area at the daytime or at night. There's a lot of people that ghost hunters that do a lot of EVP research out there. The real high point is the Hayride, and that's where it's a little bit like a haunted Halloween hayride, but you are met when you first go in by the insidious men in black. And Brent Rain's joke that even the economy, the downturn of the economy has affected the men in black, because instead of chasing us into the TNT area in black Cadillacs, they're using golf carts. But
well, how many people, Steve, attended like this year's event?
It was I forget. They count the number of people that go into the. It's several thousand because they can count at least the people that attend the museum. They get a decent count there.
Well, I tell you, when I was in that town, you could see tumbleweed going down Main Street. It was that quiet. I mean, I think we visited with there was a large 5 and dime chain there, Ben Franklin's. I'm sure it doesn't exist anymore.
Ben Franklin's is like a hobby type of shop.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, the fellow that I'm sure was running the Ben Franklin's there told us about the curse of Chief Cornstalk.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Okay. So see what you tell. I mean, some people, they have a theory why the Mothman was seen. It just didn't, come out of the vapors, so to speak.
Well, I think what I understand is, now I've met, I don't know how many greats, but it's something like Chief Cornstalk's great, maybe 7 times. I met his granddaughter. And according to her and others, that the curse of Chief Cornstalk came out of a play that was written in possibly the 1800s. So it's very possible that Chief Cornstalk, of course, was murdered, but and I wouldn't blame him for uttering a curse.
Well, now, there's a famous poem, Tippecanoe and Tyler too.
Okay, yeah.
I don't remember, but I remember Ray Palmer published it in his magazine.
Oh, okay.
I guess I don't know, but it somehow it tied in with the curse.
Yeah, I'm not sure how it started.
Next time I'll do my research. But
I've always viewed the Point Pleasant area as just another area of high strangeness. You've got the Skinwalker Ranch, Marley Woods, the Bridgewater Triangle,
Bradshaw
Ranch, right, and the Gilliland Ranch. And it just seems like, for whatever reason, there's certain areas where all these things seem to tie together somehow. And the one thing I want...
Yeah, go ahead. I
want to mention real quick.
Nick. Yeah, go ahead.
People, if you go to the festival, you've got to go on the Hayride. It culminates in a classic flyover of the Mothman. My friends John and Tim Frick are the men behind the curtain, and you will see the Mothman fly over your cart as you go by with a ear-piercing scream, and the kids love it, and the adults love it too.
I can't wait. Nick, have you seen any? You got any patterns for us?
Any what?
Patterns, like, is there any similarities between any of these cases?
Oh yeah, I mean, the main thing, I guess, is the way in which the MIB pretty much operate, and that's where they're always in control of the situation. You know, like I briefly mentioned earlier, that most people wouldn't even think about letting three creepy-looking guys in the house at midnight if you had a knock on the door, but they do. You know, so there's definitely that aspect of the person becoming under the influence of the MIB, which allows them in. And, you know, that there was a good point brought up as well by Steve about how some of the events almost seem to be like hallucinatory in nature. Not in the sense that the person imagined it, but possibly as if the imagery of the visit and everything else was projected into the person's mind. You know, if somebody else was in the room with them, they might have seen the person just sat almost in like a trance-like state on the couch and nothing else at all. You know, so is it something that's been projected? That's a parallel I've heard in a number of cases, but you know, it doesn't help us catch the MIB. You know, they're elusive as ever, and I think that also comes down to the fact there's a sort of paranormal factor. They have this sort of here 1 minute and gone the next minute.
Can we conjure them up?
Well, you know, I mean, that's what Peter Beckman suggested that he'd done back in the 60s with the whole Rosemary's Baby thing. He felt that, like, the mind setting, the ability to sort of open doors with hallucinogenics, and the soundtrack and everything was conducive to something happening, and he felt that they manifested because the circumstances were right. So, and I think you can find a number of cases like that where somebody, you know, was looking to have some sort of experience and they had one. So I think it's, you know, that can happen.
Well, now, didn't Alan Greenfield write a book about calling up the Men in Black?
Well, yes. In fact, some of his material we utilize in our Angel Spells book. He came up with a certain cipher. He's investigated, done research on John D.
John D. Right?
Yeah, and the Enochian alphabet. We've had him on the program, and he believes that you can actually find patterns by using this cipher, that you can actually find patterns to when maybe the Men in Black might appear, or when the next UFO flap might be. Now, Claudia, you had some problems or incidences involving interference on your telephone, right?
Oh yes. One incident. I was married in the mid-'70s, and my husband was in law enforcement, and he was gone nights. So I would go to bed early with a book, probably some scary thing that I was always so fond of.
One of mine, no doubt, yes.
Yes, And actually, I think it was this one particular night, it was a book called Phone Calls from the Dead.
Oh, yeah. D. Scott Rogo, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And anyway, I had the radio on, and they were interviewing Betty Hill, you know, the famous UFO abductee. And at that time, she was a widow. Barney Hill had died. And she mentioned that whenever she spoke on one of these radio interviews, that her phone would go crazy. So, of course, me with my vivid imagination, I'm sitting there, and I thought, wow, what if I hang up and my phone rang and I heard all this static, because that's what she said. It was always static on her phone. So I hung it up, and lo and behold, about 15 minutes later, my phone rang, and it was nothing but static on the phone. And I thought I'd have a heart attack. And at the time, you know, I was reading about UFOs and all this stuff. So I think when you developed a passionate interest in anything to do with this, I think a portal, from lack of a better term, opens, and you're just you experience all kinds of strange things. I know I have. And one other thing that happened to me, and this is really strange, but let's go back to the 60s. I was dating my husband then, and it was probably about 1967, 8. I was only a young kid. And I would drive into Albany and meet him. He got out of work at midnight. And we would watch Johnny Carson together at his parents' house, and then I'd turn around and come home. And I was always terrified because I had to go past the cemetery that was always spooked me out. And on the weekend, my mother and father would go out for dinner and dancing or whatever. And I was always afraid to come home because there's this field that's next to my house. And, of course, I was always imagining that somebody would grab me or whatever. So this one night I came home and, my heart's kind of beating a little bit. And I thought, oh, God, please let that car be in the garage. Please make my parents be home. And they were not. So I pulled in and I thought, well, this is stupid. I'm 19 years old. I just run in the house, lock the door. Everything's going to be fine. And so I did. And I ran in, locked the door, put the light on the mantle. And I was working for a New York telephone at the time. And we had just gotten a free phone, all the employees. And I had a private number. I had just gotten the thing. It was a pink phone. I just loved it. And I had it in my bedroom. And it was on a different line than my parents' phone, which was in the dining room. And I think 3 people had the unlisted number. And my Dennis, my boyfriend, was one. His sister was another one. And my friend Ann was the third one, if I remember correctly. And like I said, I had just gotten the phone. So no one in the neighborhood would be able to call me, or really no one. And my future husband was a kind of a serious type guy. He wasn't one to play pranks or anything like that. So anyway, I came in the house and my phone was ringing. And I thought, gee, who could this be? Probably a wrong number. And I picked it up, and it was a man. It was a crackly reception on the phone, and he sounded about 40. And he said, Claudia? I said, yes, who is this? And he said, never mind. He said, you just pulled in your driveway. Do you know what I'm going to do to you? Just like that. And, of course, I'm trying to plan in my mind how I'm going to get out of the house, and I thought, well, I'll run down cellar. I'll go out the cellar door. I'll run through the field next to, the nearest neighbor.
When a neighbor calls, yeah, I've seen the movie many times. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, then I heard I heard the car pull in, and it was my mother and father. And I happened to think, number one, no one had that number. There were no cell phones then. There wasn't even a telephone booth around here for somebody, if anybody had seen me pull in and called me. It's very remote out here. It's kind of desolate. So I thought, was that because of my interest even back then in reading about UFOs and everything? So, yeah, that was another strange episode out of my strange life. But I don't know. I think that, once you open that door, you don't know who's going to walk in. And I think they feed on your fear. I was very afraid coming home that night. And I think they put on a good show for me. I always believed that. Nothing to do with Men in Black, but it certainly was something to do with my fear that night.
Well, yeah. Well, how about these telephone calls, though? I mean, how are they able to do that? I mean, what is it a real voice behind that? Now, I guess in Mothman Prophecy, well, they kind of Indrid Cold, who actually was part of Woody Derenberger's UFO experience. That was the spaceman that he supposedly met, but somehow they managed to work Indrid Cold in as the voice. I guess the voice on the telephone. Who's behind that? I mean, is this actually, is it pranksters, Nick, do you think, or is there real entities or energies, or how do we account for this sort of experience?
Well, I mean, in short, we don't. It is hard to understand.
I thought you had all the answers. 3 books on the subject, and you don't have all the answers.
Well, what I can say for sure is that on many occasions, people who've seen the Men in Black get these weird calls, but very often, like Claudia said, it's often static, weird noises, hang-up calls, without a voice. Now, obviously, in this particular case, clearly there was a voice at the end of the phone. However, you can find throughout various aspects of the UFO phenomenon where you get electrical interference and weird things going on with cars, engines, radios, all sorts of things. And I think the Men in Black aspect of this with phones is kind of linked with all this somehow. But one of the things I will admit is that the Men in Black, even if they're paranormal, they seem to be sort of eerily adept at finding people's phone numbers and hassling them. And so you have this weird situation where there's like a physical component, but then a paranormal component as well. It's like paranormal entities, but they're using phones, which is, a really bizarre concept, but that does seem to be what's going on.
Well, once again, though, I mean, you have this connection with the paranormal because, Claudia, your phone call sounds a lot like these, and we referred to it like, phone calls from the dead. People who get, telephone calls from somebody that they know has passed away, quite a while back, yet there they are calling them on the phone.
Right. I have a theory, and I think it's some kind of, again, I use the word demonic because, like whatever they are, some negative energy that poses as your relative or your friend. I don't believe dead people can call you up from the other side. I just think it's silly. But I think entities can mimic voices of dead people. And I think that, that's mediums. I think that's what's going on there. I don't believe they call up the dead. I don't believe that for a minute. No.
Well, that's what John Keel was saying in Mothman Prophecies. I mean, he would receive phone calls that claimed to be from people that he knew. Yet afterwards, they wouldn't acknowledge that they made the call. I know he said that one of them, sounded like Gray Barker. Now, knowing the way that Gray liked to play practical jokes, it could very well have been Gray doing that.
One short story, and it'll only take a second. My sister-in-law took care of a neighbor who had cancer. She was an old lady, and she was kind of estranged from her family, and the lady died. And Dottie is not one to, has no interest in this stuff, but she did tell me, she said one time after this lady died, her phone rang after dinner. She was doing the dishes, and the woman said, Dottie, this is Margaret. I want to thank you for all your help. And the phone went dead. She said it was absolutely her. So, who knows? That's another thing that came into my mind. Yeah, it's a strange world.
Yeah, it really is. So now, Steve, is there anything? Has there been anything going on in Point Pleasant right now that's unusual?
Well, we have kind of an informal. Sort of an official title for an informal group, the Mothman Irregulars, and that was name was dubbed by Rosemary Ellen Guiley. And we do go down sometimes in November and other times, as beyond the regular festival. One night, a group of us were down there on 11/11/11 at 11:11 p.m. down at the TNT area. And we were trying to do the EVP thing and whatever. And to make it's a long story, but to make it very short, both Rosemary and another lady they're both sensitive, and they started picking up on, they were getting the impression of some kind of shadow people or shadow being. And another gentleman we were with who had been in the TNT area once before and become nauseous because something weird was going on there, he experienced a bout of nausea. So you had two people independently picking up sort of the same, psychic vibe, and a third individual that was becoming, it was having a physical effect. And that was in the dead of night in the TNT area one night. So there's a lot of stuff going on, not necessarily directly related to. I mean, the whole area is sort of a hotbed for weirdness. So I don't, people still occasionally will report something like a Mothman creature or whatever, and certainly, still see strange lights in the sky. I even had a weird experience one night. I went in there alone after my friends John and Tim left. I just wanted to see if I had the, intestinal fortitude to do it. And I just went into one of the igloos and looked around and then went back to my motel room across the river. Well, the moment I walked in my room, now it was a couple of weird flashes of light that I experienced driving back. Nothing happened in the TNT area.
We're going to have to keep that information top secret because we're running out of time, which is unfortunate because it's been a great conversation. Nick, give us the titles of your books on the Men in Black.
On the Trail of the Source of Spies, The Real Men in Black, and the brand new one just come out, Men in Black, Personal Stories and Eerie Adventures.
And a hell of a lot of more books than that. Mine is the UFO Silencers and the Men in Black UFO Terrorists Among Us. Steve, how do people find out more about the Mothman festivals?
There's a Mothman Festival website. You can easily go there, Google that. There's photographs from past festivals and gives you lists of past speakers, and there's all kinds of good stuff there.
Well, good enough. And Claudia, you and I are going to get together very soon, hopefully, for a good old-fashioned ghost hunt.
I think we should conjure up Charles Fort. That's what I think.
Well, I think that's a great... maybe we'll do a remote broadcast. Well, no, we can't get into the cemetery after dark, I think. We'd have to deal with the people floating around in their pajamas, which is not a bad idea, but, right. What the heck. And Tim, what are you working on? I know what you're working on. You're working on a book about psychic phenomena.
That's right. Okay. We're gonna keep it top secret right now because it's going to be a big surprise once it comes out.
All right. Well, there's lots of surprises, and lots of surprises. There always is on Exploring the Bizarre, and don't forget our conspiracy journal. And we've got some interesting shows coming up on December 3rd. We're going to have Joshua P. Warren, and we're going to be discussing Krampus, who is the dark image of Santa Claus. And we got Paulino coming back on. We've got shows on poltergeist. We've got programs on cryptozoology. This is the good old-fashioned paranormal type of program here. We don't throw in politics. We don't talk about the Federal Reserve. No, it's Exploring the Bizarre.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.